Podcast, the Cristo Rey podcast. It's the podcast. Podcast, the Cristo Rey podcast. The greatest podcast in the Alpha Quadrant podcast. Oh boy, here it comes.
Welcome back to the Cristo Rey podcast. Today you are here with Brianna Blankson,
Ruby Monroy,
Marti Mitchell. Hi, everybody.
and Daviana.
It's good to be back, guys. Okay, today we are joined with Dr. Raglan, our very own Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
Good.
Hi, Dr. Raglan. Welcome.
Thank you.
How has it been since starting at Cristo Rey?
It's been really good so far. I started over the summer, and there have been a lot of really, really friendly people I've met. The staff is really wonderful. They've been really welcoming and kind and helpful, and students are amazing. So I have very much enjoyed my time that I've been here so far. I've had mostly virtual meetings with students so far. I've had some different student organization meetings that I've attended just to meet a couple of people. I'm trying to find a good time where I can come and meet people since you all are in the same class all the time. So some mornings I do plan to maybe be standing by the door and saying hi to everybody. I don't know when else I can have that, because of COVID. Normally I would want to just really get out there and be in the cafeteria and all that. But since those things aren't happening this year, I've had to get a little creative. But everybody that I have met so far has been wonderful.
What do you do? Tell us a little bit about that.
Good question. So one of my main roles is to help to educate the faculty and staff and students about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So before we all got back to school, I did some trainings with the faculty and staff about different areas of diversity. I did some trainings about oppression and culturally responsive education, historical context of current injustices, and those types of things, just so that there would be more awareness on the part of faculty and staff. And those are the kind of things that I would like to do with students. Another thing that I'll be doing is working with programming. Each month is a different heritage month. Helping to support students in building some programs is another big piece of what I'll be doing. And besides that, I'll just be providing overall guidance, any issues that arise with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion, race, gender, those types of things. That's my area of expertise. So if anything like that comes up, I will be advising those decision makers of what they should look into and which way the decision should potentially be made, just providing those kinds of recommendations.
Thank you. Our school is a very, very diverse school. So you'll see a lot of different types of people, backgrounds, religions. So we're excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. You're part of such a really important role for our school because, like Marti just said, we're full of diversity and there are a lot of religions and different of ethnicities in our schools. So I know there's some people who might want to train to become someone like that and hopefully go out into the world. Can you describe what the process was like trying to get that position and be ready for a situation like you're in now, where you're going to have to be ready to help kids who are in need of just finding a place where they really belong in a world full of racism and discrimination?
I have to go way back for that one, way back to when I was growing up. So growing up in Cleveland, I had a lot of different types of challenges and experiences with racism and sexism and a bunch of those other kinds of things, classism, social class issues. So I started to notice those issues more and more. And then when I was in college, I learned where they come from. And I learned about how these different issues came to be. I was taking African American studies, women and gender studies. I was taking a bunch of different classes like that. And it really opened my eyes because at the time when I was younger, I could see that things were clearly wrong. I could clearly see that things were wrong. But in my education, I hadn't learned the language to describe that. outside of some like here and there types of experiences or different clubs or, different extracurriculars that I was in. But in school, I didn't really learn about that kind of stuff. So I was really, really wanting to learn more about that when I got to college. So I decided after I finished my bachelor's degree, I decided to do a master's degree in cultural studies and education. In that degree program, I went to Ohio University for that. And for my undergrad degree, we explicitly learned how we are taught in the society and how that can either be for our benefit or for our detriment, right? We learned about power, we learned about privilege, we learned about oppression. That was like the main subject matter. So all in all, I'm learning during this time how to talk about these things in a way that people will understand, and also how to teach other people, right? How to teach other people about this kind of stuff. So then in the different roles that I've had leading up to here, I have been training people on all of those types of issues. I've been educating people on all of those types of issues. And then I went to Ohio State for my PhD program in multicultural and equity studies in education. I was teaching classes for people who were about to be teachers about power, privilege, oppression, racism, sexism, all of those different things, teaching those to people who were getting their bachelor's degree in education or people who were getting their master's degree in education. So between that and then working at the Multicultural Center at Ohio State, I'm doing all of these trainings, and it really has prepared me to be here because I've been doing this kind of stuff for a really long time.
Greetings, Cougars. Mr. Rose here, reminding you all that October is National Bully Prevention Month. Here at Cristo Rey, we want to create a bully-free zone, but we need all of you to be active participants in ensuring everyone feels safe and welcome.
Hello, fellow ninth graders. My name is Najmi Tal. Please complete my bullying survey that was sent out on Monday by Mr. Rose because it can provide results and statistics of bullying. Thank you.
So there's not a question that somebody can ask during one of these trainings that I have not heard before. There's this similar patterns of questions that I might get, and I know what to say, or I know like where to refer a person to, or hey, you should check out this reading, you should check out this documentary, those types of things if somebody really needs to have a deeper understanding. Those are the main things. I have been training for this kind of role for for a long time. So I think that it's different being in such a diverse environment, and it feels really good because I can see that tangible end goal. It's like the tangible end goal of the school being a better place and the students having that sense of belonging in the school. So I hope that answers the question. I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but all in all, yes.
No, that was perfect. It's really interesting to hear you say that because you were talking about how just like you feel kind of at home here with it being so diverse, and just like all the steps that you took and the fact that you learned this when you were a little girl and you know it and you keep going. I feel like that means it's something that everybody should know. And learning about this is not like an ageless thing. You can't be like 2 years old and not know this, or 3 years old and not know this. Like, it's stuff you should know as you're growing up, because skin does determine a lot as we have been growing up in the US and America, as you can see. And it's just interesting. And it's fun because like, our school will be really prepared to do something like this. Like they've been open to the changes that we had. Like when we got the flags put up in the cafeteria, I don't know if you could see that, but we got it of different countries, of the people who go to our school. And it's like we're taking steps. And I think adding you was a really great step that we took because we really need that. And I'm shocked that we went so long without having that in our school. So I'm so glad that you're here. And I can't wait for the things you're going to do.
Yes, thank you so much.
And I really give props to you because I bet having the job that you do has had its own challenges in itself. Because I know talking about when it's the topic about diversity, inclusion, and all that type of stuff, I know there's a lot of point of view. And sometimes they're not the best. Like, what has been the most difficult challenge throughout your career that you've had to face due to this? And how have you handled it and turned it into something positive?
Oh, that is a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges that I face is, I will say two of them. One of them is I look young And I'm not old now. I'm not old, but I look younger than I actually am. So sometimes people think that I am much younger than I am, and sometimes it can make them not take me seriously certain times. And the other thing is just being a Black woman. Sometimes that also can cause people not to have a certain level of respect. Or I haven't really experienced this much here, but in other spaces that I've been in, where people would say certain things, or they would challenge me in certain ways that didn't feel respectful. It didn't feel like they're just trying to learn more. It felt like they were trying to prove a point, or they were trying to prove me wrong in a certain instant. What I just say to that is an example of why this is important. Because if somebody is trying to help you to gain an understanding of a topic in a deeper way, and you kind of dismiss that person just because of what they look like, that's why we have to do this kind of work. That's why we're here. So that has been a challenge. Definitely, sometimes I have been dismissive of the things that I've said, but I try not to let it bother me too much. But sometimes I think it has bothered me, and that's the time that I have to realize that it's not just me, or I'm not just saying something wrong. I had to stop second guessing myself. I had to stop saying, well, maybe I shouldn't be saying this, or those kinds of things, because everything that I say is not just me saying it. When you go into a doctoral program and even a master's program, everything that you come up with, every paper that you write, everything that you do, it has to be backed up by a lot of research. So I can say, yes, this has been my personal experience as a Black woman, having experienced racism and sexism, but I'm also referring to all of these other people who have studied this and researched this for decades, and we have tons of data that this exists. That, I think, is something that I just have to keep telling myself, because it can make you second guess yourself when people are not really believing you or taking you seriously.
Hi Cougars! Would you like to dress up for Halloween and potentially win a prize for your costume? Well, here's your chance. Next week, the Student Council will be hosting Cristo Rey's first ever Halloween fashion show. All you have to do is come in your best dressed Halloween costume, and Student Council members will be coming to each cohort to take pictures of those who want to participate. And at the end, a committee of teachers will select the winner. Seniors will dress between the 27th or the 28th, depending whether you're Group A or Group B, and freshmen, sophomore, and junior will dress between the 29th or the 30th, depending whether you're Group A or Group B. May the most fashionable person win. Good luck, Cougars!
My least favorite part of doing this kind of thing, and like I said, this has not come up here, but it has come up in past jobs that I have done that were related to this area, when I have to convince, and I've stopped doing this, but sometimes I feel like I'm trying to convince somebody that racism is real or that sexism is real. And I have come a long way of not actually doing that anymore, because we have, like I said, we have so much data, so much evidence, so many personal experiences that support that these systems of oppression exist, right? It is real, and it does have real implications in people's lives, and life or death implications in people's lives. So I'm not going to sit here and try to convince somebody that race matters. That's not what I'm going to do. Now, if somebody's ready to understand what they can do about it and how they can grow and how they can do better, how they can help solve the problem, then I'm interested in the conversation more so. But I have had to get away from trying to convince somebody, because at this point, with all of these different stories, news stories, we have all these different books, we have so much that you could look into to understand the issue more. It's not my job to try to convince you. At that point, I'm going to conclude that you're trying not to listen, that you're trying very hard not to listen.
Interesting. And kind of as a follow-up question to what Ruby said about the challenges, did you have any of those challenges when you were in college, or did you have any of those challenges when you were in high school, or when else have you saw that you had those type of challenges like racism and sexism, people judging you for being a woman, saying that you can't do something because you're a woman? So what other experiences have you had of that happening?
Great question. I think that when I was in high school and in elementary and middle school, I noticed gender inequality more. I noticed sexism more, because I went to schools that were overwhelmingly Black. So it was a little bit different. And I noticed how the girls were being treated in that environment. And that was just more blatant. I could see the disrespect more blatantly because pretty much all of us had the same racial background. When I got to college at OU, I had a very different experience. It was the first time of really being in a student body that I was one of the very, very few people of color in the environment. And that had a huge impact on me. I started noticing things like microaggressions. I started noticing when people just weren't treating me well, or when they were ignoring things that I was saying, either when we were in class or if we were at a club meeting, things like that. And that I had never experienced before until I got to college. When I was in high school, I was the president of this and that and all of the sis boom bob, you know what I mean? I was in everything, and I never had a problem with people listening to me or taking me seriously until I got to college. So I was in a lot of leadership roles there, and I had a completely different experience being one of the few people of color. And in those different organizations I was in, I would usually be the only person of color. Period. It usually would only be me in a lot of those spaces. So I experienced a lot of, I would say, more subtle types of racism in terms of microaggressions. If you're not familiar with that, those are the more subtle things, the more, insidious things. They're not the blatant types of racism and not blatantly people calling you a name, but those are the subtle things, like saying, oh, you're so articulate, those types of things. Oh, let me touch your hair. Those kinds of things I started experiencing more in college. And I didn't know how to handle it because I didn't know what it was that I was experiencing. I didn't know I had never heard of microaggressions. I had never heard of what to look out for, and I was not prepared to handle that. So I started having some internalized oppression, and I started thinking that something was wrong with me because I wasn't prepared to be in that environment. And I didn't learn better until like a few years later.
Hey guys, I am Shurjana, and I am the secretary for our school's JSA chapter. I just wanted to give you guys some information about Fall State, which is one of the biggest conventions held by the JSA organization. This year, Fall State will be held on October 24th and 25th, and because of everything going on, it will be virtual. You'll get the chance to meet people from all over the ORV, Midwest, and Texas as well. You will also be engaged in some heated debates, thought talks, and many other activities that will give you a chance to express your views and opinions. For those of you that have already registered, this will be a great learning opportunity for you. And for those of you that haven't registered or need help with registration, please contact JSA's cabinet members or Mr. Shoemaker. Thank you.
No, I find it amazing that you brought it up, because I could totally relate all of those subtle sense of racism that people just put on you, and you start thinking there's something wrong with you. Like when they say the things you were saying, like you're pretty for a Black girl, or you speak English so well, you must be mixed with something, your hair so long, you must, all of that stuff. And you even see celebrities in the past, they were being attacked for saying the N-word, or back then they weren't, but nowadays they are. So people will bring up videos of them saying the N-word, saying you did this wrong, or you need to apologize for this. So then you see people apologizing for it now, like the celebrities, and others are telling them they shouldn't be held accountable for that because it was in a time where it wasn't as sensitive, or racism and the whole ordeal wasn't as sensitive. Do you think that is true? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think this year, 2020, and the 2019, 2018 are the more sensitive years, and we're growing as a country compared to back then, where saying all of these things weren't seen as really racist, or just using words to belittle us in a sense?
That's also a great question. I think that something about this year does feel different. It feels like more people are paying attention than I have experienced before in the past. I'm not 100% sure what accounts for that difference, but I do see more movement across different races. I think that in terms of the George Floyd video, I think that had a lot to do with it. I also think that it has a lot to do with the more obvious instances of racism that have happened over the past few years that now is hard to ignore. It's not as subtle. So I do think that it's different in the sense that it seems like more people are paying attention. I think that there's still a long way to go. And there are still people who don't understand what is happening or who don't believe what is happening, who may not believe that racism is an issue. There's always going to be that. There's always going to be that. But I think that something feels different. It makes me feel hopeful. It does make me feel hopeful. But we have a long history of not being consistent with promises in terms of we'll get better in regards to this. This will be better. For the country to really take that step and help this situation to get better, I don't know if I sense that happening right now, if that makes sense. So I sense that individuals are helping. I sense that individuals are paying closer attention, but I don't sense that the nation is all the way there yet, if that makes sense. And there's several reasons for that I could go into, but I want to see if you actually want to go into it. Otherwise, we could go to another question.
No, I think that's interesting about your comment on the whole George Floyd and the type of racism that's still going on. How do you think it can improve? Like, what steps do you believe that we could take for it to get better?
That's a great question. I think that there are several things that could help it to get better. And I won't go into all of them, but I think one big thing is acknowledgement of the problem. I think that now people have, on a broader scale, acknowledged that we do have a problem. I do think that. But I don't think that the nation as a whole has given certain things like not only a formal apology for slavery, but also reparations. Because right now, it's not just, we see these instances of blatant violence. But we also have lots of different forms of inequities and inequalities. And those can include anything from the differences in neighborhoods between different races, some neighborhoods having resources and places to go and jobs, and other neighborhoods, predominantly neighborhoods with people of color, they have no resources for the most part. They have fewer places to have access to healthy food. They're usually located closer to pollutants like landfills and factories, those environmental racisms, we call environmental racism. So those types of things need to get addressed, right? That's why I have this long list of things in my head, of things that can help it to get better. I think that one thing that could help is definitely some form of atonement for slavery, aka reparations. And that's a complicated issue, but I do think that we are so far behind based on 400 years of enforced poverty and enforced inequality and government sanctioned inequality, that if we just start at square one and say, okay, let's all be equal now, we would still have centuries to catch up, right? We would still have centuries to get to where we should be based on all of that history. So I think that is definitely a huge thing that would help.
I always feel like someone is watching me. Tom, is that you? Hey Cougars, while we're on the topic of Halloween and music, the choir class has been working hard during the different time to make a ghostly Halloween mashup for the students. So within the next few days, be on the lookout to hear about the Ghost of Tom and all our Halloween tunes.
Also, I think that on an individual level, as in terms of what we could do, we could learn more about the history. We could learn more about what has contributed to where we are now. And I think that we can take that information into whatever field you all choose to go into, and you could make that work within your own sphere of influence. So if you want to be a doctor, it would be really important to learn about the history of medical racism and to use that into your practice, right? If you want to go into STEM, engineering, or anything else, even education, it is really, really important to learn about these things so that when you actually go into those fields as an adult, you will have a good understanding of that, and you can figure out what you can do within the organization that you work in to help within your own sphere of influence. And you can even start doing that now as a student. It's not something that you just have to wait on. I think learning more about the history is an important individual step. A lot of the other things that I would have to suggest are more so on a federal policy type of level.
Okay, so I'm a freshman and I want to know if you can go back in time after years of study, what advice would you give yourself at 14?
Oh man, that's a hard question. That's a tough question. What advice would I give myself at 14? Oh, I would probably tell myself that I was having a rough time at 14. I would probably say that this is not permanent, right? This is not permanent, and live your life now. Of course, have fun and everything, but I would say to live your life in a way that you would look back and be proud of. You would look back and not be like, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have done that, you know? And it's not saying to be perfect. Of course, everybody's going to make mistakes and have challenges, but you can also create the type of life that you want starting right now, right? You can start that right now. You can make sure that your things like social media and things like what kind of connections can you make right now, right? Will you be able to, how can you get into certain spaces where you're meeting people who work in the places that you want to work, where you are, going to different types of experiences so that you're able to get into other types of spaces. I would definitely say to do more of that. I would say to definitely do research in terms of what will you like to do when you get older, and talk to adults about it. Talk to some adults about it. Talk to some adults about how they have liked their career. Is there anything that they would do differently, right? I would definitely say those types of things. So there are things that you can do even before you start applying to college that will help you build the life that you want later on. I would say to do as many of those things as you can.
And as a way to, kind of close out the segment, what is one big takeaway that you want students to receive from this interview? What is an advice or something that you just want them to keep in mind through the rest of the school year?
I would say to get to the point that you are learning on your own about some of the different injustices that we face in our society. Those things will not always be discussed in the spaces that you're in. They may or may not be discussed in your classes. They may or may not be discussed in your family. But there are so many different ways that you can learn more about racism, that you can learn more about sexism. There are so many different sources that you can use. So when I talk about my history of not having access to a lot of that, or not having a person who just knew a lot about that kind of thing around me, and then kind of having to put the pieces together by myself and going through a lot of confusion and not really knowing what was the right type of information. Like, you all have me here. I have written about this topic extensively and also have read about these types of things extensively. Use me as a resource. Please do use me as a resource. If you have anything that you want to learn about with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion, please ask me, please reach out. I would love to talk to you about it. I would love to give any kind of book recommendations, but I definitely encourage you to do your own research about these kinds of things and use me as a resource so that you can have a good start of doing that type of research and learning more about the injustices in our society and what you can do to help.
Well, guys, you heard it from Dr. Ragland. If you ever need to, just stop by and say hello. And if you have any questions about diversity and how you can contribute to, creating a more diverse school, be able to reach out to her. And we thank you so much, Dr. Ragland, for coming to our podcast today. We really appreciate having you. I feel like you're such an essential thing that the school needed.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Podcast, the Cristo Rey podcast. It's the podcast. Podcast, the Cristo Rey podcast. The greatest podcast. With us, sick judge as the queen of say podcast. See you next week. We'll see you next week.